Hi, and thank you for joining me for Computer Safety Backup Your Computer. In this class, I'll discuss all the ways you can work to keep your data safe. I want to take a moment to differentiate between the idea of keeping your data safe and keeping your computer safe. We're not going to be talking about virus protection, antivirus programs, scanning for malware, any of the things that we would talk about in, say, an internet safety class. That's not the topic of today's class. We also won't be talking about hardware safety, things like surge protectors and other protections you can take to keep the physical computer safe. What we're talking about is the data. We're talking about not losing the files. Those pictures, documents, videos, PDFs that you were emailed by your bank, whatever it may be that you're concerned about losing if you were to come home and find that your computer was broken, that's what we're going to be focusing on today and making sure that we keep safe. There is going to be some overlap in the content of this with our cloud storage class and our Your Files class, but this entire class is going to be discussed through the lens not of sharing files or networking or working collaboratively, but only how we would back things up and keep from losing them. So we're going to be going through different ways to prevent that. Whether your concern is accidental loss, by which I mean, oops, I deleted something I didn't mean to, or where did I store that file, I can't find it anywhere, whatever that problem might encompass. Computer failure, simply your computer breaking. This happens to every computer eventually. Malicious software such as ransomware or other virus problems that could prevent you from getting to your files. Any of those, you are better off not having all of your eggs in one basket and not being completely dependent on your computer continuing to work and being in good health. For those reasons, we're going to go over all the different solutions that we offer. Some of them are going to involve working with real companies or purchasing physical items. It should be understood that neither I nor the Bloomingdale Public Library are endorsing any of these companies, and that any purchases or subscriptions that you make are a personal choice based on whether the user feels comfortable with the spending and what it is that you're interested in using. Recommendations are going to be made in general terms, but I'm going to be giving specific software or hardware examples when appropriate. These recommendations that I'm making are based on 20 years of experience maintaining the library's computer equipment as well as extensive personal use. So with that, we're going to begin with the most basic form of backup, manual local backup. In many ways, this is the most intuitive form of backup. We have the idea we don't want to lose certain files, so the natural thing to do is copy those files to another location. We can do this in a number of ways. You see here I have pulled up on the screen options for optical drives. These are CDs, DVDs, Blu-rays, any kind of disk that we might write to with our computer. So you can burn onto any of those options with either the equipment built into your computer, or if you don't have an optical drive in your computer, as more and more computers don't, you can get an external one that would plug in via USB drive. You can also copy to USB drives themselves. Excuse me, I should have said a USB plug, not a USB drive. But you can copy to USB drives themselves if you want, and you can have those that you plug directly in. You can also have external hard drives, which we'll talk more about in the next section, but you can copy directly to those as well, too. In any of these cases, you are inserting something and copying the files that you want to save to it. This is a beginning option. It's relatively low intensity. You simply have to put in whatever device you want to copy to and copy to it. And it's relatively low cost. You need to purchase either the equipment to copy to things or the media themselves, example being the CDs or the DVDs or Blu-rays that you're copying to, or USB drives. But other than that, there's not too much to it. There are pluses and negatives to this. So let's take a look at some of the options and why you might or might not consider going with a manual local backup as a way to store your files and make sure that they're not all lost. So we'll start with the positives. First of all, as I mentioned, the cost is relatively low. You can see here that these are relatively low-priced devices that you would buy, and depending on how much you needed to copy or backup, you usually don't need to buy too many disks to copy things to. So relatively low cost and rarely any kind of subscription or ongoing cost, just a matter of paying for the equipment and the media that goes with it. Very strong privacy. If you're concerned at all with the idea of your information being stolen on the web or accessed in some way, you don't have to worry about that when you have physical items that you've copied to in your own home and you are storing there. Of course, there is the chance of somebody simply breaking into your home and taking things, but comparatively that's pretty low compared to the idea of somebody breaking into a cloud storage site and taking it that way. So for privacy purposes, there's a lot of pluses with this. There's also strong protection against ransomware. Let's take a moment so I can explain what ransomware is if you're not familiar with it. It's been getting a lot of press lately because it's had some major targets that it's hit, but ransomware has been around for a while. I've been helping patrons that encountered it for 5-6 years at least, probably longer than that, and it's been a concern of ours here at the library for quite some time too. What ransomware does is if you get something infected on your computer through a download or something that you didn't suspect, very often an attachment in an email or a prompt on a website that you follow incorrectly, usually phishing attacks, lots of different options like that. You get something installed on your computer, and once it's installed there, it takes over your computer and it gives you a notice saying that you need to pay them if you want to be able to access your files. This is what happened recently with a pipeline in the southeast. This happened with the beef industry and other smaller companies on a number of occasions. But it also happens to individuals. Usually they ask for less money from individuals because, of course, they have less money to pay. But people are asked to pay $2,000 or $5,000 or $10,000 to get their files back, and that, of course, is a major expense and can be a very big problem. And so when you want to back things up, you want to make sure that you have them in a location where they will not be accessed by that ransomware if it's infected. So if you copied all of your information to a CD or DVD or to a USB drive and you simply put it in a drawer and then it's sitting there in case you need it, if your computer was to be infected by ransomware, you know that those devices, the CDs, the USB drive, whatever it is that's sitting disconnected somewhere else, would be safe because those have no way to be infected by it. So for that reason, even though this is a relatively low-tech and fairly basic solution to backing up, it does have very good protection against ransomware. Finally, it's scalable to the amount of data you have. A lot of the solutions that I'm going to present are going to cost the same thing whether you're backing up 500 gigabytes or 5 gigabytes, but with this, you don't need to buy a lot of stuff if you only have a few documents or a handful of pictures that you want to save. So that can be a big plus side that you don't have to worry about overbuying or paying for more than you need when you are looking at possible backup solutions. If you only have your tax documents from the last 10 years and you want to make sure you don't lose those will fit easy on a CD. No problems there. You don't need to buy a large external hard drive or an ongoing subscription for just a few files. So a lot of positives there. However, there are some negatives. And the first one I would say is the most important in that, as you get the idea from its name, it requires manual action. You have to actively go and back these things up yourself. Generally speaking, when you're planning for any kind of security system with computers, that's something that we have to do here at the library and that other people do a lot in their lives. Anything that requires people to reliably do something is a poor system. People forget, they stretch things out, they let things go, they don't have enough items bought to back up to, and then mistakes can happen and files can get lost. So the advantage of this, that you can choose what you're going to back up and do it what you want to, can also be a big disadvantage because you have to remember to choose that. And so there's a lot of room for error, both in backing it up incorrectly and in simply not doing it because you forgot, or you just made a decision not to and to hold off for a while, and then something breaks and you realize what you've lost. So big risk involved there. Another negative is that you are vulnerable to losses at the location, by which I mean any kind of disaster that hits where your computer is stored may very well hit the same physical place where you have these CDs, DVDs, Blu-rays, or USB drives stored as well. So if you have a fire, if you have a flood, if there's an earthquake, any other problem that damages where your computer physically is, you could lose all that stuff that you have stored there too. This is why businesses that do this will often have off-site storage. They will have somebody take something home with them, or they will work with a partner location and copy the information from one branch to another branch and vice versa. Of course, the downside of that is when you're moving information around, then you have more of a risk of theft. And you hear stories about companies losing all their information because a laptop was stolen out of a car or some disks were stolen. That very often is how this happens, as things are being moved from one location to another for security, and then in transit it gets lost or stolen just because somebody happens to break into a car or take something they see as available. So there are risks there where you have everything in the same location, even if they're not all stored in the same computer. Finally, the media itself might be unreliable. The information that you're storing things in can be damaged, can wear out over time, can physically just not work. We've talked a lot so far, or I've talked a lot so far about CDs, DVDs, Blu-rays. All of those, the way they worked, we talk about CD burners or DVD burners. There is a thin layer of dye on the underside of the DVD, and the light that it shines etches information into that dye. That dye itself has been shown in studies to corrode over time. Now, that doesn't mean that it always will or that it will always fail, but if you were asking me for a guarantee that something that you burn to a CD will still work fine 20 years from now, that's not a guarantee that I can make. These things tend to be unreliable, tend to be easily damaged. Now, the upside is your CD probably will not go bad the same day that your computer breaks, but the downside is people very often don't check these things that they have backed up. They put them in a drawer and forget about them, and then when they need them, they pull them out and they may or may not work. Hard to say. So the media itself can be unreliable. Another form of media that you can copy to that we haven't talked about too much, but I will talk about a little bit more in the next section, is what's called a tape backup. And tape backups are condensed tapes that work similar to VHS tapes, if that helps you visualize them, but they store a lot more information. They used to be the main choice of backup for most businesses and organizations. That has gone out of style in recent years. It's had a little bit of a renaissance with the risks for ransomware, making tape a more secure option for a lot of people. However, tape drives do have a fairly high failure rate. Having used them myself for many years, I know that, for one, the readers themselves can break over time, and it can be hard to find ones that match your old technology, so you can pull up and get the information from the old tapes. And for two, the tapes themselves can deteriorate or just not work after a little while, similar to what your experience might have been with old VHS tapes. They are also, I would say, prohibitively expensive for most people at home. The devices themselves can be pretty expensive to put into computers, and the tapes themselves can add up over time, and so that's why I didn't talk about it much in this section of the sort of low-cost, basic way of backing things up. But even with the higher-end choices there, the media itself can fail over time, and so that's just something to be aware of. It's something to be careful about. So, taken on the whole, and with all these things in mind, I would suggest that this solution may be right for people with a small number of files that they want to keep safe and that they don't update frequently. That second point is key. If you're talking about your tax returns from 5 years ago, those are static, they are not going to change, and so you can put those on a CD and know that you have them and set them aside for a while. But if you're talking about something that you update on a daily or weekly basis, that's a little bit tougher to back up like this because you need to make copies of it every time you make changes, or it becomes useless. You start to have a copy from 6 months ago, and that's great for the data from 6 months ago, but it doesn't have all the work you've done since then. So if you have files that you want to keep safe, you don't update frequently, and that don't require a large amount of storage, then this might be the right choice for you. Otherwise, you might want to consider some of the other options that we're going with. Now, I'm going to show you some of what I would consider to be better options as we go forward, but before we leave this, I do want to mention one last thing. This is a whole lot better than nothing. So, as I talk about automatic local backup or cloud backup options or any of those, if you're uncomfortable with it or you're going back and forth and you're trying to make a decision, while you're waiting, just copy the key things to a USB drive. Something is way better than nothing. This is similar to what I teach people when I talk about safety measures for, say, getting a phone case for their cell phone. Yes, there are better options out there. You can get good or bad cases, but a bad case is so much better than no case that it's better to get something in place. So if you're at all unsure what to do and you haven't decided yet what solution you want to get or where you want to put your money with it, while you're waiting to make that decision, go ahead and copy something back to a CD or a DVD or a USB drive just so you don't lose it in the meantime. Because that would be very disappointing to have been trying to decide what backup you wanted to go with right when your computer broke and you lost everything that was important to you on there. So, just something to keep in mind as we're going forward. Now with that, let's go on to the next section. Let's talk now about automated local backup. So automated local backup involves setting up equipment connected to your computer to automatically copy some or all of the files from the computer to an external drive. Typically an external hard drive, but conceivably a tape backup system as well. You're going to do this on a routine basis, usually either nightly or weekly, often at low activity hours to avoid interfering with work. This has several advantages over the previously discussed method, but there are some downsides. Let's start out talking about the positives, and then we'll go into the negatives and then talk about some more technical details for this. So for the positives, the upfront equipment cost can be fairly high, but there is no recurring cost. So you do have to buy the initial equipment, but there's no media that you are replacing on a regular basis, and there's usually no subscription cost involved. There are higher end options that will involve a support subscription. We'll talk about those a little bit later on. Second positive, you have strong privacy for the same reasons that we talked about before. You are still storing things locally on a device that is within your own office or home, and so that is not going out among the cloud. Yes, theft is a possible concern. Yes, you have to be careful about viruses or other things that you initiate onto your own computer, but it is safer than sending things out on the web in many ways. There are safe alternatives for cloud backup. We will talk about that, but from a simple understanding of how it works, things stored locally have better privacy and security than things that are stored on the cloud. Typically, there's a large data capacity. That means the storage is very high. You see, I've pulled up some relatively low price options here on Amazon by doing a search for external backup hard drive for PC. And you can see for $129, you get a 5 terabyte storage device. For $59, there's a 2 terabyte storage device. Again, the library is not recommending any of these particular devices or particular companies, just showing you examples here. If you're not familiar with storage sizes or what these measurements might mean, to give you a frame of reference, a typical computer has 500 gigabytes to 1 terabyte of storage when it comes out of the box. That's how much storage it has available on it. Most people do not use all of that. If you do extensive photography, take a lot of movies, whether you have family or friends that you take a lot of pictures of or videos of, or you travel a lot, you might start to build up quite a bit there. If you work in graphic arts or in music or in video editing, you might build up some storage space there. I can say over 10 years of digital photography has left me with 300 to 400 gigabytes worth of images and videos that I have on my computer that are being backed up on a regular basis. So that's a good amount of space. It's nowhere near 4 terabytes, which would be, roughly 12 times that storage space. So these have a good capacity to cover everything that is on your computer, unless you are working at very high-end graphics or video editing. And that's for a relatively low price, so a lot of storage space available. We'll talk a little bit later on why you might want to have more storage space than what is available on your computer. You might think, well, if I'm backing up the entire computer, wouldn't the size of my computer's storage be plenty? And in many cases, yes, but for some businesses, you might want to consider having more, and I'll get into why in just a few minutes. So typically, large data capacity is a plus for this. Next to that, it's automated, which reduces human error or dependence, so if you forget 1 week or if you're just traveling or not there for whatever reason, it should still back up on its own as long as everything is working fine and in place. And finally, it can be made as disaster-proof as desired by increasing the spending a little bit and the time input a little bit by having multiples of these. So I'm going to, in the negatives, mention that it's typically vulnerable to location disasters for the same reason that I talked about before with the local media, but say you wanted to minimize that. You could get 2 of these, and you could put one of them in a fireproof safe every week and then swap them out and go back and forth between the 2. And that way you would have one of them relatively safe, even if something happened at the location, while the other one was doing the job. And so, yes, if there was a fire, you would lose 1 week's worth of work, but you wouldn't lose everything. If you are running a business or an organization and you have a legal obligation to keep all of your financial records or all of your employees' records, then it might be worth putting in that extra cost and extra effort to have something like that available to you. You could also use multiples of these to have that off-site storage that I had discussed before, where you simply take one of them with you home or take one to another location or to somebody else in your organization so that you have these stored in multiple places and you don't have to worry about that. And that's a little bit easier than carrying a lot of CDs back and forth. You can simply have 1 or 2 hard drives that you swap back and forth as you go. So there are options to make these things more disaster-proof. It involves a little bit more spending, but it's not as cumbersome as doing that with the media that you're reusing. Now, there are still negatives with this. As I mentioned before, you're still vulnerable to location disasters. Another negative with these is that the error notification isn't always effective as keeping you informed about ongoing failures. What I mean by that is if the hard drive is not successfully backing up either at all or perhaps there are a few files that are failing, a lot of these will have systems that can notify you, but you often have to go and track it down, whereas the more cloud-based things will be tied to your email account and they will let you know if the computer is missing for 2 days, so it's failed to back up, or if there are problems with the file. the notifications can be a little bit faster with the cloud-based ones than they are with the local devices, depending on how much you pay for it and what settings you go with. In most cases, these are not safe from ransomware, because if the computer is infected, the infection can very often spread to these. Now, there's a bit of a predator and prey relationship with viruses and protection against viruses, in that the companies that make these things are trying to design ways to get them to be safe from these ransomware and other attacks, and then the companies that make these attacks try to design ways to get around those safeties, and that keeps progressing over time. And so some of these will have protections that try to minimize your risk to ransomware attacks. That doesn't make it 100%. And part of the concern is that sometimes these infections can be on your computers for multiple days before you are aware of them, and so you might have that computer backing up to a device before you know that there's a problem. And so it's not like you can pull the plug immediately on the device once you know there's a problem and prevent it from backing up. It might have already done so because you might have been infected for several days. So for those reasons, anything that's directly connected to the computer isn't 100% safe from ransomware or other related attacks. And finally, there's a high upfront cost for the equipment. Now, $50, $99, these aren't necessarily prohibitive costs, but they aren't trivial. It's not as much as, say, doing a $5.99 one-week trial for a cloud service, or buying a couple of CDs and copying things to there. There are slightly larger expenses that you have to pay up front because you are buying a piece of equipment that you then have to connect. And so if you decide afterwards that you are not terribly fond of this, then that can end up costing you. Now, looking at my screen or just thinking to yourself, hey, I know how much storage is available on some of the thumb drives that I have. Why would I buy an external hard drive to plug in instead of just using a USB drive and plugging that in and copying my entire computer to it? The reason is the software that comes with them. Some of these hard drives, in fact, most of these external hard drives that have larger storage, will come with setup options when you plug them in that are proprietary to their company. So Seagate will have its own, Western Digital will have its own, and when you plug it in, they will go through an installation and setup process where they will allow you to automate the process and have it back up either every night at 2 in the morning or every Sunday at 6 a.m. or whatever time is convenient for you and sufficient to your backup needs. If you are using your computer a lot or running a business off of it, you probably want to have it backing up daily so you don't lose a lot of work. If you're a very casual computer user, then once a week might be plenty. So just plugging a USB drive in doesn't give you the opportunity to automate that in the same way. Yes, there's software out there that you could download and you could set up to do this, but that's getting to be a lot of moving parts and a lot of things that can go wrong, rather than just have one thing built in that takes care of it itself. One other thing that you might want to consider, some of the software that comes with these, and also going back to the point that I made earlier about why would you want more storage than is available for your entire computer. Depending on what you do with your computer, or perhaps what your business is, you might want to store what we would call multiple versions of the software. What that, or what we call versioning, means is that you are creating instances of your backup for perhaps 1 day ago, and 1 week ago, and 1 month ago, or whatever time increments you might like. So if somebody in your company or you yourself realize, oh, I made a mistake and I saved over my work on this, and now the new version of this file doesn't have what I need anymore, or it's not working properly, or I made changes that I don't like and I want to get back to the way that it was last week, a normal backup would not work for that because it would simply give you whatever file you had at last backup time. But when you are going through the settings of these, if you choose to have the versioning option available, where it saves one from 2 days ago or 3 days ago or a week ago or whatever options your storage allows for and allows you to do, then it will allow you to jump back to that previous version. So that can be a way to recover things that otherwise would have been lost. It's particularly effective if you have a lot of staff that are working and saving things to the same location, and they're more likely to make mistakes, and you want to be aware of that and be safe with it. Downside of this is that it, of course, uses more storage because every file that you have is being stored multiple times. Now, some of these more expensive devices can be pretty sophisticated with that, and they will understand which versions have been unchanged, and they will not duplicate those. And so things like operating system files that make your computer come right back up again if you lose them, they will not duplicate those every time it backs up from 1 week or a month or however long ago it is. But other files that you have been changing and updating, those they will keep multiple versions of. This again gets into how much you are paying for the product and how much you need. So this would depend on what you are working with there. For most home users, something like a basic external hard drive that costs in the $50 to $100 range would be perfectly fine. That would certainly meet my needs, and it would for most other people at home that just don't want to lose their pictures or videos or important documents that they have saved, but they don't need to worry about having multiple copies of their resume dating back several years. But in a workplace situation, then you might need to have more copies of this information, again, depending on what you're doing with that data. Now, considering all these factors, I'd recommend this option for users who are concerned with the privacy risks or uncomfortable with storing things on the cloud, but want to have the added security of a high-quality backup that works automatically. I will be talking about cloud options in the next 2 sections. You will be able to tell in that my personal preference leans towards the cloud backup solutions. That's what I trust more with my own data and with the libraries. But there are a lot of pluses to these local devices as well, and in fact, if you are looking for the maximum security, you might consider a hybrid option between having things stored in the cloud and things stored locally, just to make sure that you have as many security nets as possible. They can be relatively inexpensive, and it can be well worth it rather than the risk that we were talking about with major losses. So with that, we will move on to our next section. So now let's talk about ways to back up your computer on the cloud. The nature of the cloud has some inherent advantages and disadvantages, better security against local disasters, weaker privacy protections, but I want to take a few minutes to get into the specifics of manual or automated backups. First, there's manual cloud backup. In this instance, we are choosing to upload a file to a cloud backup location. There are many services online that provide these options. In this example, I'm using Google Drive. The storage space and details of the interface will vary from service to service, but it's generally going to work like this. So we're looking at a Google Drive account. I access this by going to a Gmail account. If you don't have one, you can make one for free. You are allocated a free amount of space on Google Drive for everybody that has a Gmail account, and once you're here, you can see the files that are here. Now you could just drag and drop files to this, and that would add it as well, but I can also click New and File Upload or Folder Upload. If I choose File Upload, I can then take a video here and choose Open, and you'll see it's working on uploading the file, and there it's done. And now I can see that video has been uploaded. So that is another thing that is now stored on the cloud, and so if my computer were to go up in smoke, I have not lost that video. That is now saved here. If I instead chose Folder Upload, I could then say go to Documents and select a folder and get everything from that folder after I upload that. And it is taking a moment, and it has uploaded both of those files, and now I see I have a folder there as well. Within this, you can organize the files and rearrange them, but that's getting into a Google Tools conversation and not so much a cloud backup. The idea here is we have now manually selected files and copied them to a cloud location. This is very similar to what we were talking about at the start with copying them to a CD or to a USB drive. The advantages of this are pretty straightforward. One, it's very protected from local disasters, because of course this is stored in Google's servers off in the distance wherever they are located, so if there is a fire or a flood in my house, anything stored here is not affected by that in any way. These services are usually low cost or free. Some of them you might have a monthly fee for. Most of them you can get a certain amount of storage for free. If you use up all of that storage or you want to expand it for whatever reason, then they will start charging you. It's typically a relatively low price. If I were to change this from 15 gigabytes to 100, I believe it is $1.99 a month. So that's a relatively low increase, but it is not nothing. So low cost or free for the online storage locations for that. It's easily accessible for recovery purposes. So if you need to get something because you accidentally deleted it from your computer, or you had a malware attack, or your computer just broke, you can get to this from any computer or any internet accessible phone or tablet anywhere in the world. It does have all the other bonuses of cloud storage in that we can share things and work collaboratively. As I said at the start, that's not the point of today's class. Today we're just talking about backing up our computers for security, but it feels wrong to not mention that when we're talking about this. And finally, This version of Cloud Backup does have very strong ransomware protection because just like when we were copying files to our CDs or USB drives, you are manually choosing which files to copy and to move here. And so these are individual files that are stored. It's not your system as a whole. And so if your system were to be infected, that would be unlikely to attack this. Now, of course, there are negatives as well for the manual Cloud Backup. Number one, and the obvious one, it requires user participation. You have to actively do this. You need to choose which files to upload and do that every time, and if you miss any or you don't get around to it after they've been changed, then those, of course, would not be backed up if you had a problem with your computer. Space limits can be a factor if you start uploading a lot of files here or using it heavily. 15 gigabytes might seem like a lot, but if you start uploading a lot of videos or pictures, that can become a problem, so be aware of that. Privacy concerns are a real thing. Every service wants to be as secure as they can within reason. Some of them put more emphasis into that than others, but there are always high-profile issues going on online, and we have seen break-ins to the iCloud and other cloud storage locations in the recent past. So if you had really strong privacy concerns with the information, you would want to be cautious about which cloud service you chose to work with. Finally, version issues, you want to be careful about that. If you are uploading a changed file to here that has the same name, it is very possible to accidentally overwrite the name. It should, by default, put another duplicate of the file with a slightly different name in. Let me demonstrate this to you. If I were to choose New and File Upload, and I will go back to Videos, and again choose the same video as before. You notice it gives the choice version 2, and I can say keep as a separate file. And now you see it created the same file there, but with the number 1 in parentheses next to it to show a different version. That's generally a good thing, generally what you would want to do, but this can be a little confusing if you have multiple versions of the same file and you don't know which is which. I've helped a number of patrons in the past that had to sift through lots of different resumes to try to figure out what was the right one and which had the correct information. That leads to a possibility of errors that you don't want to make. You don't want to send out inaccurate things or have to do updating that you've already done before, so be aware of that you can have multiple versions of things when you choose to upload them manually. Considering all those factors, I would recommend this as a supplementary option for people who are already using a more comprehensive backup. So if you are using a external hard drive to back up everything on your computer at home and to automatically do that, if you had some key files that you wanted to make sure you didn't lose in case there was a disaster at home, this could be a nice additional way to copy those without having to worry about every single file day to day. This is also useful for people who don't have a lot of files to back up, but they want to keep a few things safe. So maybe while I was talking, you were thinking, I don't really use a digital camera very much. I don't take a lot of pictures or movies. I don't download that much stuff, but I do have my tax returns and my mortgage company sent me some files and I have some medical records that I want to make sure I don't lose. What should I do with those? Should I just put them on a USB drive? Personally, I would feel more comfortable with them in a cloud storage location because I'm less likely to lose that. There are a lot of options available for you with cloud storage. I would encourage you to consider different choices out there. I would recommend going with a larger name just so you don't have to worry about them going under or being bought out and having the policies changing. You know, Google is a fairly steadfast company. The library is not endorsing or recommending them. I'm just saying they've been around for a while. They're probably not going anywhere. Dropbox is another one that is a fairly large and it's a cloud storage location that's been around for a while. Amazon is getting more and more into the cloud storage business, and they, again, are a huge business that's not going to go anywhere. So consider ones like that. By all means, feel free to consider smaller options, but just be aware that they might be bought out or they might change hands as the tides change with those things. So with all that considered, now let's talk about the next option, the automated cloud backup. Finally, let's discuss automated backup. There are several different versions of automated cloud backup. Products like Google Photos or iCloud that automatically back up certain files from devices like tablets or smartphones could be considered automated cloud backup. However, those aren't comprehensive to the device and they can't be used with most computers. So for the purpose of today's class, we're going to talk about third-party products that you install on your computer to automatically back up your device. There's a number of these software products out there. You can see a comparison here that I'm showing and we'll talk about in just a moment. And the way they work is you need to install the application on your computer and then it will back up either the folders you select or the entire computer on a scheduled basis. Consider space restrictions that go with the pricing when deciding whether or not to back up everything on your computer. So let's take a look at this comparison before we get into the positives and negatives of automated backup. So if you're choosing to do this, if you decide that after we go through this, this sounds good to you, you might want to look at a review of backup services like this, where they'll give you some details about it. Now, this is PCMag. They're a online for-profit review company. You can take their opinions with whatever value you give them, but they are one that provides a lot of information on this and that I use for a lot of demonstrations. Looking here, you see among the best online backup services for 2021, you see a number of options presented here. iDrive, Acronis, OneBackup, Backblaze, Carbonite, LiveDrive, and keep going to the right and see some more options as well. What things are they comparing? This is the important thing here. Free storage that's rated. Now, these are just the reviews. If you wanted to get into the details, you can go through that. You can also check the prices. We'll talk about that in just a moment. But let's talk about the different categories of information. Do they offer any free storage at all? So if you want to try this out, see if you like it, can you store anything and see how that works? 5 gigabytes isn't very much, but if you want to try out iDrive, you could go with that and work with it. Then storage base plan, this is the more critical one. How much storage are you allowed? Some of these you see in number, others you see unlimited. Now you might think, oh, well, obviously I want unlimited, and that might be true. But the difference between these is when there is a number, that usually means you can use it across multiple devices. So for example, for iDrive you see 2 terabyte storage, but number of computers is unlimited. So you could take your iDrive account and you could have it on both yours and a spouse's computer, or you could have it on your computer and a smartphone, or on a tablet. You could divide this up however you want, as long as the total storage is less than 2 terabytes. Whereas something like Backblaze that's unlimited can only be on one device. You can of course pay for multiple licenses with this, so you could have unlimited on 2 devices, but then you're getting 2 for the price of 2. So if in your home you have a large amount of storage but only on one computer, then you might want to go with something like Backblaze, where it's unlimited storage space but only one device available. If you have not as many files, but you have a lot of different devices you want to back up, maybe you have a tablet and a smartphone and a computer, then you might be better off with something like iDrive, and so you would choose that. Now, as we continue down and look at some of the other options here, privacy key encryption, that's security. That's going to be there for most of them. File sharing, that's the ability to share the files with other people. That's there for most of these. Folder syncing, that is where they would synchronize changes in your folders continuously. That is not as consistent. I don't know if that's as valuable for most people, but it's something to be aware of. Versions kept. This is something we talked about a little bit earlier with the external hard drive. Do you want to have a different version of the file from 2 days ago, or a week ago, or 10 days ago? This gives you the option to control that and to have multiple versions if you want. And you can see what period of time do you want to spread these across. You can have it be a long ways back, or you can have it just be 30 days, however you want to do that. Finally, where do you buy this? You can pay per year, pay per month or per year. So this is a quick overview. The key things that you're going to want to consider are going to be the pricing. Of course, we do have to pay for these things, so you want to know how much it costs. The storage space, and whether you want to have it on multiple devices or just one. If you want to read through the reviews, you can see how they're rated for other things. I have looked up other places where you can see if you go to LiveWire. As you see it here, they have the 21 best cloud cloud backup services, and they can tell you what they like and what they don't like about all of them. So you can go through those and see what appeals to you there. Once you choose one of these to work with, you would then install it on your computer. So you would go to the company's website, you would download the install, and when you install it, you would choose what do you want to back up on your computer. If it is something that is unlimited storage, you would probably say back up the entire thing. That way, if something goes wrong, you can re-image your computer with all of that information straight across. If the storage space was limited, you might want to choose just the files that you don't want to lose. These would be your libraries, like your documents, pictures, videos, maybe your desktop, maybe your downloads, maybe maybe your user folders in case you have user information from the different programs. Things like that you would want to back up. You don't need to worry about backing up Windows. That's something you can acquire elsewhere. So something to consider there depending on what kind of use you want to get out of your computer or out of your backup. Once you have set up one of these accounts and you're logged into it, it would look something like this. I'm going to go into Code 42 backup. Now, For security reasons, I'm not going to show you too much of the files that I have backed up onto our library backup system here, but I do want to show you how this works, that you would have listed with whatever cloud service you go with, you would have backup devices listed, and if you needed to restore them, you would be able to either select the entire device, or depending on which system you're using and how you have it set up, you might be able to go into a file system similar to going into the File Explorer on your computer, and then select the files that you wanted to download. A number of these backup services, if you look through the reviews, you will see this in some detail, offer different options. If you needed to restore your files, you could go and download them either individually or in groups, or if you had a major catastrophe and you needed the information back quickly, some of them offer the option of sending you a hard drive in the mail with all of your information on it, so that if you weren't able to download, say you had a large amount of data that you were backing up and you weren't able to download that, they can send you something in the mail, of course for an extra cost. So be aware of those options when they're out there. I have used a number of these services personally and here at the library for years. I've used iDrive, I've used Backblaze, I've used Code42 as you can see there, and I've had success with all of them. Matter of personal preference, I would go with the reviews that are provided online because these things are always being updated and changed. I think you'll be happy with any of them. They will do the basic task that you're looking for. Now, when you choose to download the files, this gets into the positives and negatives, but be aware that depending on your internet connection, it might take a while. I have never had to download an entire system recovery using one of these options. I have had to download large volumes of files, like tens of gigabytes, and that took rather a while. It takes a while for them to compile it and get it ready for a zip file for you to download, and then you have to actually download it. Some of these products, including iDrive, will have an application that installs on the computer that you would use for downloading the files as well as for doing the daily backup. So it's not always through the browser if it's larger numbers of files. So be aware of that. Now, talking about the positives and the negatives of automated cloud backup. The positives, it's a secure remote storage of all files, so you know that it's not stored locally. If you have a fire, if you have a flood, if your computer goes up in smoke, it's not going to affect this device that it's connected to. Fast access to the files anywhere in the world, that's of course a plus, similar to the other cloud services that we were talking about. Low upfront cost, you're paying a monthly cost, which is, as you'll see, $5 to $10. You see $60 a year, so that's $5 a month. Relatively inexpensive compared to going out and buying a $100 device and finding out you don't like it. Can apply to multiple devices. That depends on which service you get and how you choose to pay for it, but sometimes you can use that if you have a number of devices you want to back up. Safe from local disasters, we talked about that already. Protects well against user error. So once you have this set up, you don't have to remember to back it up. It will back up the entire folder or location, so if you make a change to it, add or remove files, those will be handled. Some offer versioning support. We talked about that a little bit already. So similar to the external hard drive, you have the option of versions to be backed up depending on which service you go with. And moderate ransomware protection. I mentioned before the sort of predator-prey relationship of the ransomware creators, where they try to find ways around this to make it harder for people to protect their information with these backups. Some of them are finding ways into infecting your instance that are backed up on these things. The versioning control can help with that, so if you have a version backed up from 30 days ago, if you can restore to that one before you had ransomware issues, that can solve the problem. You would still want to wipe out everything on the infected computer before doing that, probably buy a new hard drive, but you have the option to back up to different information, so that will certainly end up being cheaper than the ransom that they're asking for you most of the time. Now the negatives, there is a monthly cost, so for those of you that don't like to add another expense to the list that you have to pay every month, this is something that's not going to go away. You're going to have to pay for it every single month. It's relatively low, but it is still there. Privacy concerns. Some of these are better than others about security. You notice the privacy key encryption makes it rather hard to get to the information and difficult for people to steal the files, but difficult does not mean impossible. They are still stored on the internet, so it's not 100% secure there. Can be a drain of internet connection. So especially when you first set this up, it's going to be copying all of the files from your computer to this location. That can take a couple of days for the initial copy. Once you've done that, then it will only copy the changed files every night. But that initial time when you're copying a lot of things, that can slow down your internet connection pretty significantly. And if you do have to download files after you've restored them, that can also slow down your internet connection. So if you have a moderate to slow internet connection to begin with, you might find that suddenly streaming TV is not working as well for you if you're copying several gigabytes of files. And finally, it does require a software install, so that is one more thing that has to run on your phone or on your computer. If you have an older phone or computer, that can sometimes provide a challenge. Most systems will work with this, but older ones it may not. In my opinion, this is a good option for users that have a large number of files they want to be as certain as possible not to lose. There are, of course, the negatives that we talked about, and nothing is 100% secure, but I can say for my personal use, I feel more safe knowing that I am not subject to losing all of my photos if there is a disaster in the home. I do like to supplement this with other systems just in case iDrive or Backblaze or any of these companies that I mentioned here stop existing. If Code 42 goes out of business, I don't want to lose all of the library's information, so we do have other systems of backup to supplement this. But if I was going to have just one thing in place, this is a relatively secure option. In conclusion, every individual needs to decide on their own what's best for them based on their specific needs. But for a home user or business that wants to be certain not to lose files, I'd recommend a comprehensive backup, either an external hard drive that automatically backs up on a nightly or weekly basis, or one of these cloud-based services that's installed on your computer and will automatically back up everything. So I'd recommend one of those, and perhaps supplemented by a manual backup option, either locally or cloud-based, where you're just copying some key files that you want to make sure you don't lose to either a system disaster or some kind of ransomware attack. That would be how I would go about feeling most safe about my information, particularly if this was for a business or organization and you had an obligation not to lose the files. Personally, I have a lot of photographs that I wouldn't want to lose, family trips, things like that, and so I feel safer knowing that I have them stored in multiple locations just in case something goes wrong. I hope you found this a little bit helpful. If you have any further questions, feel free to stop by the library or give us a call. With that, thank you very much for your time and have a great day.